Apocalypse Now, The Godfather, and On the Waterfront. Few people have accomplished as much as Marlon Brando has throughout his career, including winning the title of Actor of the Century. The fact that he has 2 Oscars and a few of the most significant acting roles in history doesn't adequately capture what he contributed to the field. He was the first to introduce a natural method to acting in Hollywood, depending more on the character's imagination than on memorization of words and emotions. This helped to shape acting into what it is today. However, this will not be about his accomplishments and performances, his political activism, or even his contentious personal life. No, it will focus on Marlon Brando's more problematic side that came to light on set. The parts of him that are frequently ignored are his inability to read or memorize scripts, his strange and complex demands, and his arguments with the cast and crew. Co-stars will be seen pulling his pranks, wearing his cue cards, and making strange costume requests. Even if he has had some of the greatest highs in his career, there is also a great deal of mediocrity. Examining those on-set narratives and career decisions in greater detail reveals a disturbed and tormented performer who lacked enthusiasm and cared little. The career of Marlon Brando can be divided into 4 parts: his ascent to stardom, his decline, his comeback, and his I don't care AF period. By the conclusion of his career, his on-set problems had become worse with each scene, making him absolutely intolerable. There is an explanation for the majority of his actions, and the stories only get more fascinating as you read them through to the end. But first, let's take a quick look at his pre-film career to get a sense of who he was. Born in Omaha, Nebraska, in 1924, Brando developed a childhood practice of imitating and pulling practical jokes on others. He was expelled after failing all but theater and sports in high school and was held back for a year for misbehaving. Brando's father sent him to a military institution, where he was dismissed for entering the town without permission. Brando chose to formally leave high school and follow his 2 sisters to New York to study acting, despite being encouraged to return the next year. In the past, Brando had enjoyed performing in a play and felt welcome because it was the first time he had ever heard positive remarks about himself. He received instruction from Stella Adler in the Stanislavski system, which emphasizes the skill of really inhabiting and experiencing the role one is playing. That he introduced this methodology to Hollywood, which is why he hated being called a method actor. When he began performing in theater productions in 1944, he was already challenging to work with. He frequently acted erratically and insubordinately, even getting ejected from a performance. But his problems were greatly overshadowed by his acting. Elia Kazan, who would later helm some of Brando's previous films, was his first collaborator. With his debut performance in The Men in 1950, he began his ascent to stardom in the motion picture business. He prepared for the role of an angry paraplegic veteran by spending a month in bed at a hospital, and it should come as no surprise that the performance received high appreciation. His 1951 film adaptation of A Streetcar Named Desire, which is regarded as one of his best performances and even earned him an Oscar nod for Best Actor, was his follow-up. This was the first of his 3 films with director Elia Kazan. The other 2 were On the Waterfront and Viva Zapata. In order to prepare for the release of Viva Zapata the next year, Brando traveled to the Mexican town where his character, Zapata, lived in order to observe the speech patterns, mannerisms, and movement of the locals. His performance was once again praised in a peeing contest. Brando had to protect his starring position from co-star Anthony Quinn by peeing the furthest away. After that, he performed in these 3 movies before earning the Best Actor Oscar for his portrayal in On the Waterfront in 1954, which is now regarded as one of the greatest performances ever and has the famous "I could have been a contender" scene. In fact, Brando felt like a complete failure after his performance and exited the screening room feeling miserable. For the ensuing years, he continued to be a box office attraction, but occasionally his performances suffered. Because he didn't like the script, Brando didn't put much effort into the 1954 contract he had to perform Desire. When he co-starred with Frank Sinatra in The Musical Guys and Dolls a year later, Sinatra dubbed Brando Mumbles and labeled him the most overrated actor in the world. Despite not being a singer, Brando was given the major role because he was resentful. The 2 of them frequently experienced tensions. In a particular moment where Sinatra's character eats cheesecake, Brando purposefully ruined every take since he knew Sinatra detested cheesecake. In addition to having the lead part, he was appointed director 2 weeks prior to the film's premiere, following Stanley Kubrick's resignation. Many of the screenwriters were sacked by Brando, which led to Kubrick's resignation for unclear reasons. The film's budget, which was initially set at $2 million, increased to $6 million primarily because of Brando's directing approach, which was similar to his acting style, that he pursued perfection for too long. For instance, Brando spent 2 hours to catch the ideal wave when they required a picture of the Pacific Ocean. Unsurprisingly, the 3 months planned for filming ended up extending to 6 months. After the movie's failure, Brando was added on Paramount's hit list. His on-set reputation was so damaged by mutiny on the Bounty that the industry was afraid to deal with him. Brando purposefully undermined every element of a production that was already challenging that he might have been the cause of the director change. He took advantage of the actors and crew to further his personal agenda, and if he didn't get his way, he would just stand in front of the camera and do nothing. This makes me think of Klaus Kinski, about whom we have a whole video. The picture went significantly over budget due to Brando's inflated ego and the challenges of filming in Tahiti. The movie was a box office flop and nearly brought MGM to collapse. The slew of failures that would shortly follow further confirmed Hollywood's growing dissatisfaction with Brando. Brando started accepting roles purely for financial gain, even agreeing to a 5-picture deal with Universal, which was completely out of character for him. With the exception of Ugly American, which did rather well, all 5 of the films were critical and financial failures. Later, Brando referred to this period of his career as the FU years, but he acknowledged that the criticism he received from reviewers left him feeling very wounded and distraught. He nearly lost his career in the 1960s. There was less justification for putting up with Brando's on-set demeanor and shenanigans because he was no longer viewed as a box office attraction. However, he enjoyed a comeback thanks to the movies The Godfather and Last Tango in Paris. Even though Marlon Brando's portrayal of Vito Corleone in The Godfather is undoubtedly one of the most famous in movie history, Paramount strongly objected to the cast. The president of Paramount Pictures would not allow Brando to work on a movie for as long as he is in control because of the money they lost on One-Eyed Jacks, his track record of box office failures, and his negative reputation on set. Fortunately, he gave in, but only under 3 circumstances. Brando would submit a screen test, accept financial responsibility for any delays resulting from his behavior, and accept a reduced cost. Having agreed to a reduced charge, Brando behaved well for the majority of the shoot and was genuinely helpful to the actors and staff. Nothing particularly noteworthy occurred. Robert Duvall is seen in the well-known photo reading cue cards to Brando during a scene. Despite Brando's notorious lack of line memorization, The Godfather had numerous last-minute screenplay revisions, so he would essentially get away with it, except that the other actors didn't require any. The prankster Brando also returned. For this, he was nominated for Best Actor, and director Bernardo Bertolucci had to try to keep them out of the frame because cue cards were placed throughout the set for easy visibility. With these 2 successful box office performances under his belt, Marlon Brando was back. However, he took the on-set troubles and his ego to a whole new level. The director of The Missouri Breaks, 1976, Arthur Penn, eventually gave up and let Brando to do whatever he wanted with his role since he was unhinged and unmanageable. He completely improvised it, spoke with an Irish accent without cause, acted like a dumb upper-class Brit, and dressed accordingly. This performance did not sit well with critics. According to The Sun, 52-year-old Marlon Brando lacks the discipline of a 12-year-old with the sloppy belly of a 62-year-old and the white hair of a 72-year-old. However, we may have witnessed Brando at his most lazy in Superman, 1978. Brando portrayed Jor-El, Superman's father, that he received $3.7 million in compensation, plus 11.75% of the movie's earnings, for a total of $19 million. That's more than $100 million today, and that's for just 10 minutes out of 143 total screen time. Although Christopher Reeve received only $250,000 for playing Superman, his name did help at the ticket office. Brando was a headache to deal with despite the enormous payout. In a talk show interview, Reeve even openly voiced his dissatisfaction with Brando, saying that he phoned it in and that it's unfortunate that the media doesn't care if Brando performs well or poorly. Thus, Brando himself stopped caring that it was hard to pull it out of him. Even though director Richard Donner thought his performance was excellent, Brando only needed to be filmed for 12 days for only 10 minutes of screen time. But it was difficult to get him to leave his trailer because he would receive even more. money if the shoot took longer than 12 days. In addition to not having to read the script beforehand, one of the requirements for accepting the part was that they entice him out with food. Once he was out, you had to deal with his cue card request, which had to be shown off camera. The icing on the cake was that Brando thought of doing a voiceover in which Jor-El would be a bagel, because nobody truly knows what Kryptonians look like. He even had his remarks scrawled on the baby's diaper with whom he shared the scene. Back in the 1960s, Brando's weight fluctuations were previously noted by critics. They only grew worse in the 1970s and were made evident in Apocalypse Now. Brando, who was already very overweight when he was cast in the part, assured Francis Ford Coppola that he would lose weight. His appearance as Colonel Kurtz, who was meant to be slender and engulfed by the forest, was startling given the condition he was in. Many of Brando's scenes were dark, and he dressed all black to give the impression that he was a little thinner. Coppola asked Brando to read Heart of Darkness beforehand, but he didn't even bother to do so during the 3 weeks of filming, when he was earning $1 million a week. Production was halted while the two of them spent days delving into the plot and the character. He would be paid even more if his role took longer than 3 weeks to shoot. So it made sense that he was frequently the one pleading with Coppola to spend more time with him to fully develop the character. Even though it wasn't the character's initial intent, I believe the outcome became quite iconic. After that, Brando starred in the critically acclaimed 1980 film The Formula, in which he was given the lines via an earpiece rather than the customary cue cards. Brando lived a very controversial life outside of acting that would be hard for anyone to separate from their work life. He had many partners and at least 11 children, 2 of which were involved in a very publicized court case that Brando had to plea for reduced sentencing against his son. The 90s were rough on his life, and by this time, he didn't care too much about his career. Some say that it was just his career he didn't care for, but still very much enjoyed acting. But how the two were related was something he struggled to figure out himself. He believed some of the best acting he's done was in Burn, which few people came to see, and the amount of emotional arm wrestling he did in Last Tango in Paris made him not want to destroy himself emotionally for a film ever again when there were much easier options available. Dr. Tim was one of the 2 English Mastiffs that stayed at home with Brando, so even till the end, he carried on his childish sense of humor. And that's about everything. Thanks for watching.